Hello Internet, and welcome to another episode of Experimental Cataclysm. If you're new here, this is the show where I talk about recent changes to the experimental version of Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead. Now before we begin today, I do have some things that I want to talk about. So first up, over the last 2 weeks, I've been receiving a lot of comments about where my Cataclysm content is. Now I actually addressed this in our last show. I talked about why I'm not really making Cataclysm content at the moment. And so it's a bit perplexing to me that people are going to demand and ask where the Cataclysm content is when it's clear that I explained it in the last Cataclysm content and you didn't watch it. So I don't understand why that is happening. Please stop asking me questions. This is my YouTube channel. I will do what I like. So first up, we have a change to a basic control that I'm sure will aggravate a lot of you. Now I couldn't find the original PR for this one, so I'm just going to throw up a related PR that I found. Now basically, if you were like me, you might have used the lowercase e key for picking up items. Now apparently, having item pickup in this examine menu had led to bugs previously and was causing issues overall. As such, examine can no longer be used to pick up items. Instead, you will now use the lowercase g key. This is basically the same control, it just doesn't use the examine menu. Now I was irritated when I first heard about this change because I hate literally anything that changes my controls, but once I gave it some thought and heard the justification in that it was causing issues and that people were having to work around it, I can understand this change. So yes, I'm sure you will be annoyed. I was definitely annoyed as well, but ultimately this is a small change that you will adjust to very quickly. Now I know that it's very hard to break just years and years of muscle memory, but I believe in you. You can probably do it. And on a side note, I saw that also the pickup window itself is being changed. Now this is another thing that I think will take some adjustment for people, and I'm sure some of you will shriek about it, but just to reiterate, you will get used to it pretty quickly and it won't be a big deal. Hey everybody, jumping in here as the editor, I did see while I was editing this video that the change for the e-pickup menu may be getting reverted. There is a PR that says that they may revert this behavior. I just want to let everyone know that that is a possibility. I'm not sure where it's going to land. I think the devs are discussing, is it worth having it if it causes other issues? But I wanted to let you know that it is possible that the E to pickup functionality may be restored in the future. And yeah, I didn't find out till after the main recording, so I'm just going to throw that in here. We of course will watch this as it develops. If something changes or whatever, we'll talk about it some other time. Now moving along, we've got a rework of hobbies and traits from Fool's Gold 45. Now essentially they've gone through the list of hobbies, which are still being expanded as time goes by the way, and they edited their names and point costs so that they make a little bit more sense. Now character creation has always had issues with balance when it comes to the point-based system. Most of the time when someone talks about this, the response is generally that everyone knows that these point systems are out of whack and that eventually the entire system will be reworked. So usually people don't go through the tedious effort of trying to balance things that already exist. Well, Fool's Gold did this anyway. They evaluated hobbies looking at their skill and trait benefits and then audited the point costs. Now this has affected a large number of hobbies, so I would recommend you look over the list next time you go to create a character. It's very likely that you're going to bump into something that has changed. And there's really no way for me to efficiently cover all of these tweaks, so it'll be up to you to check them out. Next up from I Am Irk, we had an audit of day 1 monster spawns. So maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago, I don't know, I lose track of time. Anyway, a while back, someone went through and adjusted monster groups to make it so that the highly evolved creatures would not appear on day 1. Now, although this was an enormous step forward towards making game enemies easier and having them scale appropriately over time, there were still some issues left behind. So now, highly evolved enemies should not really appear outside of labs on day 1. Now, this does fit with our lore, right? We have this whole system set up to evolve enemies over time, and it doesn't really make sense for them to appear very early in the game. Now, some people do say that these sort of changes make the game too easy, but we of course have access to our world settings where we can tweak evolution to our liking. You can also start the game at a later date, which will increase the number of existing evolutions at the start of the game. I really like this change. I think it's good, I think it makes sense, and it continues making the early game just a little bit gentler for new players. For the rest of us that would want more difficulty, we can manufacture that ourselves using our game settings. So as far as I'm concerned, this is a win all around and I'm happy to see it. And then one final note though, Irk mentioned in the PR that he did not interact with the zombie or mutant animals in the game. Nowadays, if I'm being honest, the scariest things that you're going to find on day 1 will be mutant or zombie animals. I would really like to see someone go through and audit these creatures as well. Some of them are extremely dangerous, and since they also have evolutions, it doesn't really make sense for the highly evolved creatures to pop up on day one. However, that was really not in the scope of this PR, so we're just going to move along. Now next up we have a few changes from Terminator 244 regarding martial arts weaponry. Now I won't lie to you internet, martial arts are one of the areas of the game where I have essentially no experience at all, so I don't really know what this was like before or even what kind of impact it's going to have on your game. From what I can tell, this person went through a few of the martial arts and ensured that they could use certain categories of weapons. For instance, for Sojutsu, it looks like they went through and added in some of the spears that had been missing as well as polearms in general. For Fior di Battaglia would be my guess. I'd have no idea how to say that. They ensured that they had the more hooked weapons were added to the list. Now again, this is an area of the game in which I do not have very much experience, so I can't tell you much about it, but I will link to all the PRs that I saw in the description down below. Next up from Bombastic Slacks, we've got a change to clothing layers. Now you're all probably familiar with how layers work. They really have not changed very much since I've been playing, beyond a few small changes here and there. Well now, thanks to this PR, instead of just having these meta body parts, there are now sublocations for each layer of clothing. This means that items that would previously conflict, like shin guards and knee pads, they will now be on different sublocations, so they will no longer conflict with each other. And because they no longer conflict, that means you will not get that added encumbrance penalty for wearing multiple items on the same layer. Now these new locations will be listed in an item entry to let you know what sublocation they cover. If nothing is listed here, then it covers all sublocations for that body part. Now I don't have much to say about this, it's just something to be aware of moving forward. This should make mixing and matching armor a lot easier and should overall lead to less encumbrance for your characters. And of course you should check out the PR if you're interested in seeing what the different sublocations are, but I suspect you will become familiar with them pretty quickly as you play the game and start reading those entries. And then finally today from Inglonious, we have a nerf to park monster density. Now this is something I have personally complained about, I don't know, probably 10,000 times previously. We have a lot of locations in the game that have a lot of monsters despite it really not making sense. So for a long time, parks would have on average probably about 50 zombies in them. Now someone a while back did go through and try to nerf parks as well, but still, despite that, sometimes they would still spawn 50 or 60 zombies. Now no one has ever given a good reason for why this happens, it's just the way that it was. I found this deeply frustrating. Parks are incredibly common in towns, and because of this it wasn't uncommon to find a town that maybe has like 100 zombies wandering the streets, but then would have an additional 200 or 300 just from park locations. Now Inglonious has gone and reduced the number of spawns in parks to a much more reasonable number. Now as I said, it never really made sense. Zombies would like to meander, so there's really no reason for them to be so many of them congregating in a park. We also see this with baseball diamonds, and some of the pool variants still spawn kind of out of control numbers. In fact, I guess now that I'm thinking about it, there's a lot of places that have more zombies than makes sense. Can someone explain to me why there are 40 people in a sugar house in the middle of the country? Why does that one type of lab have like 120 people in one small single floor location? Now I don't know the answers to this, and frankly neither do the people who made them. So anyway, to head off a ramble about monster density, I'm happy to see the parks get hit with a nerf. Having a lot of zombies in the world makes perfect sense, but having them in massive clusters at random locations like parks or baseball diamonds, that does not make sense. If we're going to have a ton of enemies in one location, you need to justify it with lore reasons. And most of the time when I complain about it, the only reasoning people can come up with is to say that zombies gravitate to places that they went when they were alive. Now I don't believe that's actually the lore of this game, and even if it is, I'd still expect people to linger around houses and shops, not something like a park. But anyway, like I said, I don't even think that that's our lore, so I don't think that's a good justification. But anyway, parks got nerfed. In fact, that's it for the show, internet. Nice and short, not a lot of massive stuff to talk about this time around. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Feel free to hit that like and or dislike button on your way out, and I'll be back in the next episode. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.